Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it's my number 20 team in my 2023 NFL Deep Dive Series. It's the Green Bay Packers. Make sure to hit the like and the subscribe on this video. Leave your comments in the comment section below so we can help boost these algorithms and you don't miss any of the future videos. Now, this is where this Deep Dive Series got super difficult. This was one of the most difficult teams to really predict for because the question marks surrounding Jordan Love. Is Jordan Love a guy? Is he not? Are the receivers going to be able to work with him? How much did Aaron Rodgers truly make a difference in raising this talent level up? There's a lot of rookies coming in. They somehow have a even younger weapons group than what they had just a year ago. So it's just a lot. There's a lot going on here. The defense got some injuries late in the season. Is Rashawn Gary going to be back to 100%? How are you going to work in guys like Lucas Van Ness and Devontae Wyatt? It's wild. Is Quay Walker ever going to mature into a functioning adult? There's just so much going on here. And these are where you get into these, there's groups now almost that I just had to rank based upon how they would fall in the draft order. But really the 20 team and the 17th team, there's not a whole lot of a difference there in how I feel about these teams. So it really is, like I said, a tiered system. It's just the way it worked out. Green Bay finished below Minnesota and all these other teams in their division. And somehow ended up in last in the NFC North, according to my rankings and my schedule predictions, which I think is very plausible. Very plausible. Green Bay has not had the best success in terms of maintaining a lot of health. David Bakhtiari comes to mind immediately. How ready is he? He played spot duty last year, but was never really at 100%. He was a week-to-week type of a guy. And as he ages and the type of injury that he had, and that he kind of still is carrying, how much is that going to change? And they also have one of the least inspiring and inventive coaching staffs in the entire NFL. Not taking anything away from LaFleur, but take a look at perhaps on the defensive side of the ball with Joe Barry, who's one of the most generic defensive coordinators in the NFL right now. It really drags down what I feel about the overall coaching staff. It really drags down what I feel like this defense is going to be able to accomplish despite having a pretty decent skill set across the board for most of the position groups. And I like the idea of Jordan Love. I think he sat on the bench long enough that we're going to get a real assessment of him coming into this season. I think that that's fair to assume. It's kind of like what we saw with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers in his first year, I don't think Green Bay made the playoffs his first year, but I think in his second year as a starter, they made a bit of a run. I think his third year as a starter is when they won the Super Bowl. I could be maybe a year off on that, but this is an organization that notoriously is very patient with these types of things. They've only had two quarterbacks since 1993, so that's something to be said. They commit to these players. They commit to these coaching staffs clearly. And they want to see how LaFleur works with Jordan Love. They want to see how much of this team successes and failures were truly revolving around one of the best players of all time, Aaron Rodgers. And I don't know that they're going to be that good this year. I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains. I think that they're in need of some veterans in some pretty key places. And I think that they're going to be... The upside is... If Jordan Love is the next coming of Aaron Rodgers, then they're fine. If he's not, if he's the 15th to 20th best quarterback in the NFL, then, or worse, then I expect them to finish about here or worse. There's just too many good quarterbacks. There's too many good teams still to come. I mean, you can just list them off the top of your head, teams I haven't done yet, the top 10 teams even. So it's going to be a tough road ahead, especially when you got rising teams like Chicago and Detroit in their own division. They're going to be tougher outs than I think people are giving it credit for at this point in time. Maybe I gave it a little too much credit. We'll find out. But it's my series. It's my series. And this is how I feel. These are my opinions. And I'm not wrong, and you're not wrong. Yet. We'll find out next January. But let's start with the coaching staff and their rankings there. So this is my 23rd ranked coaching staff. And I know that immediately is making people upset. But just know that it's because Joe Barry is my 33rd ranked defensive coordinator in the NFL. And I know what you're thinking. There's only 32 teams. You're right. Anyway, let's start with the offensive coordinator, Adam Stenavich, who was promoted to offensive coordinator last year. He spent his first year as the offensive coordinator just this past season. And Green Bay didn't have a lot of success on offense. Now, you can blame that on injuries, which I think is fair. You can blame that on player turnover and inexperience at the wide receiver position, which I think is fair as well. You can blame it on early growing pains of the offense, which I think is fair. Offensive line inconsistency, which I think is fair as well. So there's a lot of fair things that we can blame the backward step that this offense clearly took through most of this season. They had their moments where they played really great. Aaron Rodgers really showed up, but then there was just games where the lack of experience was really evident. In Christian Watson, the first game of the year against Minnesota, if he catches that first pass of the season for that big go route for the touchdown, that changes that entire game and potentially could change the entire season. And he had to live with a lot of that discouragement for most of the year, really until I think it was the game against Dallas where he had the 3 touchdowns. But also, that comes from coaching. Guys were not ready. Guys were not prepared. So that's a reflection on Stenavich. It's a reflection on Matt LaFleur. As the season went on, things got a little bit better. Maybe that was because the players were just slow learners. Maybe it was because the coaches were just not competent enough to get them ready for the beginning of the season, to get them prepared for all the calls, to get them, learning where to run routes properly. We saw in the Detroit game, Sammy Watkins runs an option route and runs into 2 players when he had the entire corner of the end zone wide open and Aaron Rodgers threw it there. How much is that coaching? How much is that just miscommunication? I feel like a lot of that is a coaching point because you have to know in that situation, you have to coach your players up in that situation to know that unless there's no one within eye shot to your inside, you have to take that play to the cone in the corner. Why wasn't Sammy Watkins prepared to do that? Why weren't all these wide receivers, these offensive linemen prepared properly and looked lost a lot of the time out there, which led to a lot of frustration that we saw from Aaron Rodgers, and people put the blame on Rodgers, which was unfair. He's basically dealing with a bunch of kids who didn't know what they were doing. Once Lazard and Randall Cobb started getting going, that offense looked a lot different. So where does this coaching staff now, have they learned anything? What have they learned on the offensive side of the football that's going to help develop these players? That's going to help develop your brand new quarterback who's going to start seeing full games for really the first time in his career at any type of level of consistency. But they'll always be more prepared. They'll always be more inventive than the guy you see over there on the right, Joe Barry. And this is probably where me and Green Bay Packers fans are going to have a lot to agree on. And that is Joe Barry. How is he still employed? How? He's been with the Packers since the 21-22 season. He came over from Detroit or Washington. He came over from Washington. He was part of their staffs. He's got a lot of experience coaching, sure. The Packers, they've ranked pretty well in certain aspects of defense. But man, have they looked just completely out of whack. They run. I was watching. If you watch That Franchise Guy, he has a whole video where he breaks down really the Joe Barry defense and why their defense is so uninspiring. I recommend going and finding it and he points out that the way they run cover 3 and their zones, they're running like high school, basic college levels cover 3s where they're not shifting into man. They're just letting guys run giant crosser routes. And when you're running against a team like Minnesota, where you got a guy like Justin Jefferson, you're going to see that now from a guy like DJ Moore. You're going to see it from Jameson Williams in Detroit, guys that they're going to be seeing early and often throughout the season more than any other teams in the NFL. Those guys are going to run those routes, and you can see they're just running through zones because they're not latching on into man coverage the way that you're really supposed to at the pro level when running those types of zones. And it just really, really was, he did a great job breaking it down, and it really exposed Joe Barry. And when you run into these teams that once they are able to exploit that properly, you're going to give up a lot of big plays. You're going to give up a lot of big plays in big time moments now. And that's been a real problem with the Packers defense. They've had some pretty good bodies out there. They've had Jair Alexander. Rasul Douglas had a really good career resurgence in Green Bay. Rashawn Gary is one of the most complete outside linebacker edge players in the league. They've had Zadarius Smith there for a while. They had Preston Smith, who's been a pretty decent number 2 edge rusher for most of his career. They got Kenny Clark, and they've got Devondre Campbell, who's really had a career resurgence there as well. But why they were just not capable of making big stops in big situations because of how basic everything was, and teams were able to figure it out and exploit it. And they need to get more creative on defense. They need to be able to use their players a lot better than what they've been using them to get more consistent play out of them. Because when they have put them in these more exotic situations, you've seen Devondre Campbell make big plays. You've seen Rasul Douglas make good plays. You've seen Eric Stokes flash some really good plays. Jair Alexander, one of the best corners in the NFL. You've opened up a lot of opportunities, but for some reason they go back to this it's like a weird regression that they go through even during series to series, never mind game to game, year to year. It's like series to series. You don't know, and it's just baffling to me to see. And I thought it was just me until I saw that video by that franchise guy. So good on Marcus for making that video. It might have actually been part of a bigger assessment of defenses. I feel like it was just about Joe Barry. You'd have to go on his channel. Most of you that, if you're here, almost all of you have probably heard of him anyway. But that's a big reason why I rank this coaching staff 23rd in the league, is because of all those reasons. Uninspiring play on defense, really inconsistent lack of creativity. And then on the offensive side, it's so many guys just seemed unprepared and not knowing what the hell they were doing. And that's really why are you not coaching them up more? Putting the focus more on these situations to make sure these guys are ready in these key scenarios during games that are literally costing you games and literally cost you a playoff spot in the end of the season. So 23rd ranked coaching staff. So let's talk about the quarterback position. Jordan Love gets a 77 from me. This is very much a projection of what I think he's going to look like throughout the season. I also think this might be the best case scenario based upon who he's got around him, how the offense is going to have to be, tailored and all that, and the risks of the injuries on the offensive line. I think this is about as good as you're going to get from him. They do have a rookie, Sean Clifford, who was a sneaky pick. You see, I give him a 65. It was a sneaky pick to get Sean Clifford. That was a really interesting decision to sort of hedge your bets almost on a young quarterback. Because if Jordan Love comes out and he stinks, Sean Clifford could potentially come out and game manage his way, Brock Purdy-esque, and get this team into at least playoff position. People talk about who's the Brock Purdy of this year. For me, it's Sean Clifford. He's the one that seems to be in the best position, given the circumstances, to step in and perhaps make a big impact. likelihood is that Jordan Love is going to carry the 17-game starting season, and they'll be a middle of the pack, below average football team. Maybe sneak their way into the playoffs. Maybe there's a game that swings one way or another. But I'm concerned about Jordan Love having to come in situations where now the pressure's on. He looked really good in that Philly game. However, he came into that game where he was able to play with little to no expectations. It was just go in there, run the play, and whatever happens, happens. We're screwed anyway. That's a lot different than this is now your football team. Put it all on your shoulders. He's had enough time to learn. But like we go back to the coaching staff part, how much have they really prepared him for this? I think that's a relevant question. I think, and then as we get into these position groups really outside of the running back room, you'll see he's going to have to be in a position where he's going to have to make guys around him better. He's not going into a situation where he's got these star wide receivers who are going to make him look really good. That doesn't exist here in Green Bay. There's no Devontae Adams. There's no DeAndre Hopkins. There's no Cooper Kupp. There's no one that's going to, outside of maybe Christian Watson and his straight line speed, there's not a lot of guys that are going to be bailing him out this year, barring some miraculous breakout season from somebody. So we'll see how this all works out for him. But I still think 77 is a good grade for him. And I think that would mean that he would play well enough in my eyes to earn the chance to be the starter again next year. And then they focus on maybe getting him some more veteran weapons that are like much better players than what he's got currently right now. Like maybe get him a true number one receiver in free agency somehow at the end of next season. But I think he's going to play well enough with all those things that I just said, all that criticism and all that doom and gloom and dystopian viewpoint that I just gave on him. I do think at the end of the day, he will play well enough that they'll look at him and they'll say, you know what, if we give him a little bit more, we might have the guy that we're really looking for. So let's not worry about changing quarterback. Let's give him a second season and let's see if we can not make something really great out of this. Now, this running back room is phenomenal. They have two legit number one running backs in the league as it stands right now, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Two very different types of players, so you get a really good balanced 1-2 punch, but they're both actually really good on all aspects of the game. I think Aaron Jones overall, in terms of being able to turn around, hand the ball off in the passing game, is a better running back and should get a bulk of the carries, but that doesn't mean that I'm not looking at a guy like A.J. Dillon and going like, out of all the touches you designate to running backs, he's got to be somewhere around 40%. Has to in one way, shape, or form, because he's the guy that's going to help you finish games. Aaron Jones is the guy you put in there to help you get the lead, and A.J. Dillon's the guy that punishes the defense once you finish it. Now, how much of the running threat will Jordan Love be, I think is undecided. So I give him a 60 because it's just undecided at this point. So I don't really consider him to be much of a contributor in the running game. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like as the season goes on, though, because Jordan Love can move around. But when you have Aaron Jones, when you have A.J. Dillon, that's your 1-2 punch. It's one of the best in the league. That's why you paid Aaron Jones and still drafted A.J. Dillon. And then when you even look at them in the receiving game, A.J. Dillon has surprisingly been very good in the receiving game as a third down receiving back. You don't really look at him and think it, but he's had some success in there. He's obviously not Aaron Jones. But then you got a guy like Patrick Taylor in there, who's a quality third down receiving back, not so much on first and second down, but this running back room is going to be Jordan Love and this offense's best friend, who we should see them get a lot of touches, doing a lot of the work to set up for these guys on the outside, force these defenses to stack the boxes to allow guys like a Christian Watson, like a Jaden Reed, who they just drafted, or Romeo Doubs, or whoever else they might decide to bring in as a receiver, to allow them to be in a lot of one-on-one situations where that's going to give them the best opportunity to succeed. It's going to make reads maybe a little bit easier for Jordan Love as well. And the play action game is going to really help him out. So this running back room is really the heart and soul of this offense, and I think is going to be what really drives it to being, anywhere near to passable, at least early on in the year. It's going to be something that Jordan Love can lean on that can help build him some confidence, and also shorten these games up a bit, allow the defense to maybe make some plays and then let the offense shorten the game. And, maybe it'll be a low scoring season for Green Bay early on in the year, just based upon how they might design this offense. And this is what I mean about the receivers and the tight ends. The weapons. You got Christian Watson, who really came on in the second half of the season. He gets a 78 grade for me. Then they drafted Jaden Reed out of Michigan. It was a little bit of a reach, but it serves the purpose. He's going to be like that slot player for them. And then Romeo Doubs, who was up and down all year, had some pretty brutal drops, made some good plays. He's really wide receiver too out there. Then they got Luke Musgrave, the tight end, the rookie, which I thought was a good pick. He's coming in with another rookie tight end as well, to sort of fill the role of Robert Tonyan and Mercedes Lewis. But this is what I mean when this weapons room got younger, which they were already really young, really inexperienced, and people were like, oh, okay, well, not right away. Well, now without Aaron Rodgers, it really is, okay, maybe not right away. Because even when we go to the depth here, like Bo Melton, I think, was drafted 2 years ago, which would make him the most experienced wide receiver on the roster. They drafted Jaden Reed, Grant DeBose, and Dontavian Wicks to go with Toure, Doubs, and Watson, who they drafted last year. So 6 wide receivers on this team have a combined 3 years of NFL experience. If you can even count Samori Toure's experience last year as NFL experience. I think Bo Melton was drafted 2 years ago. I could be wrong. He feels like he's been in the league for a bit. And then you got Tucker Kraft, who's basically was brought in with Luke Musgrave to replace Mercedes Lewis and Robert Tonyan, both rookies. And Josiah DeGuara is the most experienced player, and I think he's still on his rookie contract. So this is what Jordan Love has been handed here. A lot of inexperience, a lot of question marks, a lot of potential for somebody to really break out, to have some growth come out of nowhere here. But this is what I mean about if he plays halfway, he plays just good enough, I think they can look at it and be like, we kind of hung him out to dry here with the lack of experience. We did a lot of potential here for the second straight season. We really kind of just relied on potential and hoping to get a breakout star. So maybe Christian Watson becomes it, but what are the chances that a second person becomes it as well? I don't know that you got that kind of time for Jordan Love. You don't have that kind of time for Jordan Love. You need somebody, at least one guy, to break out this year. And if it's Christian Watson, then you need to go out and get somebody else. If you get Jaden Reed comes out and he's like the second coming of like the best slot receiver in the NFL, or you get a great performance out of Romeo Doubs, then maybe you can settle in and be like, okay, we got our number 1, number 2. Let's see what we do next year. Maybe you could still add somebody, who knows? But the lack of experience is just so concerning, despite there being some quality players. Like the tight end room, I think Kraft and Musgrave is quite good. I actually really like it. I like the idea that they went out and they drafted 2 tight ends. I predicted it in my 7-round mock that they would do that. I think I had them taking Musgrave and Michael Mayer, maybe. Something like that. Musgrave and Kokaift or something like that. And I also like that they committed to getting some wide receivers. They got a guy that can play in the slot and get the ball fast too in Jaden Reed. So they did the right things. It's still just, it's not win now things that they did this offseason. They didn't do anything in free agency that's worth talking about. So I understand that's typical Green Bay, but at some point, typical Green Bay is not a strategy that creates overnight success. It's more of a long drawn out thing. And you got a year and a half to figure out if Jordan Love is your starting quarterback. And so good luck to all these receivers and tight ends. What Jordan Love is getting is, if he gets a healthy offensive line, he's getting some really good pass protection. Quality pass protection here. David Bakhtiari, if he's healthy, if he can come in and play at even 90%, 85%, is one of the best left tackles in the NFL, especially as a pass blocker. Next to him, he's got one of the best guards who just got paid in Elgton Jenkins, who can play anywhere on that offensive line if you need him to. That's invaluable to have. And he doesn't, and his grading might be a little bit lesser than what you would see in any given year because he was playing everywhere on the offensive line last year. He could be in that situation again, though, this year. So I kind of had to bring it down a little bit from what I would if it was like a known thing that he was always going to be one of the guards. Josh Myers, he's going to have to, I know he got injured. Him coming back, he's still like not as good as Creed Humphrey, who they could have had. But, you take Creed Humphrey out of the occasion. They did do a good job picking him up. Then you got John Runyon, who's turned out to be exactly who everyone who's a fan of football hoped he would turn out to be, which is a really solid guard in the NFL. Then you got Zach Tom, who they picked up last year, who actually quietly had a really decent performance as a rookie, and I expect him to continue that. I really liked him coming out. He's kind of like another version of Elgton Jenkins to a degree where you can put him anywhere on the offensive line. He'll be the right tackle, and I think he's going to be really solid right out the gate this year. As it comes to their depth, they got Yosh Neiman, who's sort of your swing tackle at this point. Sean Ryan, sort of your swing interior guy, I would say, who he drafted last year as well. He's the guy that'll be like a replacement guard throughout the season, and Neiman will be the guy that comes in and plays the tackle position as the season goes on, I would think. Jake Hansen's really the only true backup center you have, so I think he sort of makes the team by default. And you got Royce Newman, who, okay, whatever. I'm not high on Royce Newman. And then Rasheed Walker, who just hasn't done a whole lot. So they got some okay depth. It's just a concern about them picking up multiple injuries. That'll kind of, but I think that's not necessarily something untrue for a lot of teams, so I'm not going to necessarily hold that against them. They do see a significant drop in the run blocking grades, however. Bakhtiari is still top-notch. Jenkins, struggles at times in run blocking. It'll be interesting to see if he can just stay at guard for the whole season, if that doesn't improve things for him. But the fact that he's had to play so many different positions throughout his career in Green Bay, he's had to play left tackle, he's had to play left guard, he's had to play right guard, he played right tackle for a while. I think he might have even gotten a start at center, if not last year, the year before that. So there's when you move a guy around like that, there's only so high you can go. I still think he's one of the best offensive linemen. I would love to have him on any team in the NFL would love to have Elgton Jenkins on their team. It's just when you move a guy around so much, he doesn't really get comfortable in one given spot. And I think that the guard position where he's played most of his career so far, I think if you can settle him in there, it'll be really good for his development. And I think he can significantly outplay the 72 grade. As for the other side of the offensive line, I think you got a bit of some issues there. Guys are going to need to develop. Your offensive coordinator is supposed to be like some big offensive line guy. That's where he got promoted from. So we're going to have to see him put the work in there specifically throughout the season and see if he can not, because you got two really quality running backs like we talked about in the backfield. So if you can get a really great offensive line play in front of them, then you might be the number one rushing team in the NFL by the end of the year. And you look at some of the depth, Sean Ryan comes in. He's a bit of a better run blocker than a pass blocker. Neiman really falls off in that sense in his run blocking. And, Hansen gets a little bit of a boost. He might be a little bit better in the run game than Josh Myers, but he's so significantly worse in the pass game, it's not worth putting him in. You want to prioritize that pass defense, which is why a guy like Sean Ryan sits on the bench, and why a Jake Hansen sits on the bench as opposed to Josh Myers and John Runyon, who are just so much better in the passing game than both of those guys. So just running through a quick position summary here. They again, there's something here. There is something here, but the coaching, the play calling and creativity on offense, making sure guys are prepared to actually play in games. There's something in these position groups in both aspects of the offense. There's definitely something there. And this is what I mean when there's definitely something there. They have the potential, the pure talent level, and if Jordan Love plays approximately to where I'm playing him, they have a top 10 passing offense in the NFL potential. They really do. The offensive line is going to be there to show up if they can stay healthy, and it's going to be invaluable. They got the 2 running backs in the backfield that you check it down, get the yards, move the football. You got the speed in Christian Watson. The talent is there. On the offense, on the rushing side of the ball, you got 2 great running backs. You're not getting a lot of help from the receivers and blocking. You're not really getting a lot of help from the tight ends and blocking outside of DeGuara, who's kind of like an H-back type role. And the offensive line has deficiencies in the run blocking game, so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes about. But I do think that the 15th ranked overall offense, like right in the middle of the pack, so to speak, no pun intended, is, I think, as accurate of an assessment as I've made out of any offense or defensive grade that I've given out so far in this series. Because, the passing offense could be, maybe 3 to 4 rankings worse, and the rushing offense could be 3 to 4 rankings better. There's a lot of room for that to happen. So I think that settling right there in the middle, 15th, that I think that's just about where this team is at right now, talent-wise. So they're going to have to really, again, strategy, the coaching staff, it's really going to have to come through. They're going to have to show something. They're going to have to show something on that offensive coaching in particular. Now let's talk about the pass rush. We got Rashawn Gary there, who is he? Let's hope he plays. Let's hope he makes it. Let's hope he makes a full recovery, yada, yada, yada. And on the opposite side, you got Preston Smith, who's a solid number 2, like I said before. Then you got Kenny Clark in the middle. And then there was a guy they drafted, Carl Brooks, out of Bowling Green, who as an interior pass rusher is going to be absolutely, I think, phenomenal for them. I think that's going to be his role on this team. I think, especially early on in the season, pairing him up with Kenny Clark, who's like this super uber athletic nose tackle. You got a good front 4. Rashawn Gary is the question mark, however, at this point. When he comes back from the injury he picked up, does he come back early enough in the year? And what does he look like throughout the season coming off of that? Now, they do have some depth pieces here at the edge position, Kingsley and Agbari, and then the rookie that they picked up, Lucas Van Ness, in the first round, who's coming in as, he's a raw prospect. I think a lot of people who follow college football and the draft process would agree that Lucas Van Ness was a guy that was drafted this high based upon the potential. Almost like we saw with Trayvon Walker. I think everyone thought that Trayvon Walker was going to stick around for another year, but it looked like Jacksonville was a team that was willing to take him, thinking that he would turn out to eventually be the best edge rusher in the class. I think Lucas Van Ness is benefiting from sort of the same type of assessments. Kingsley Enagbare, I think he just kind of is what he is. He's going to be a rotational guy that you can put in, and I think you can be quite comfortable with having him out there. A lot of power in his game. For the interior guys, you got Devontae Wyatt, who you drafted in the first round last year, who's going to be getting a lot of reps first, second, and third down. How he gets worked into there, I think, is going to be interesting. I think he's going to be part of a really good rotation with those top 3 guys. I think Carl Brooks, people are going to be sleeping on him. I think he's going to make a real impact in the passing game early on. So now you look at the D-line against the run, and then this is where I see Devontae Wyatt come in and where I see Lucas Van Ness get starters reps throughout this season. First and second down. first down, second and short, these running situations. Lucas Van Ness comes in. He's a big body. I think you can still even see Carl Brooks maybe find his way onto the field here. I think maybe you can even find, we'll talk Gary, and is still solid across the board. Kenny Clark still really good. I think you could see Lucas Van Ness maybe even kick inside because he does have the size to do this. To maybe kick inside, Kenny Clark plays that, that zero technique. Devontae Wyatt plays the 3. Lucas Van Ness comes and plays like a 5 tech on early downs, and then Kingsley Agbarie or Justin Hollins gets the opportunity to play as the edge in like a base 3-4 defense. I think that's a real possibility as well. And then Van Ness can sort of maybe work more on the interior than having to necessarily set an edge on the outside. The depth on the interior, Carl Brooks, I think is still quite good. I think Carl Brooks is another guy who could find his way into that situation, then go maybe a little bigger with 3 interior guys, and then have Van Ness and Gary as 2 really large edge rushers, edge setters on those early downs. I think that's a real possibility as well. So overall, they have done a good job over the last couple of years of building up this front 4 and this defensive line in the trenches. So all credit where credit's due. I think potentially they've overdrafted a couple of guys, and I think that fans would agree with that as well. But they didn't, and they've had hits. They've had some hits. Now we're looking at the linebackers in the passing game. Devondre Campbell is like that number 1 linebacker. Quay Walker is a man-child. He's one of the most immature players I've ever seen. He gets by on a lot of athleticism, not a lot of football IQ. A lot of his impact in the passing game is as a blitzer. Blitzer from the interior. You can probably put him out on the edge as well and get a pretty good pass rush out of him. Gonna have to improve the coverage, and like I said, the maturity level is just embarrassingly low. Embarrassing. The depth, don't really have much depth in terms of the passing game at the linebacker position really in general, but Eric Wilson is not a guy you put out there on passing downs. Isaiah McDuffie not either. You take a look at them in the running game. Campbell, he's a little bit of a smaller linebacker, which I guess as the league sort of evolves, he's, sort of becoming the average size linebacker, the average athleticism of a linebacker these days. He does take a little bit of a step back, but he's still somebody you want out there. Quay Walker is just not. He's going to have to drastically improve his game in here. I think you're going to see a lot of Eric Wilson on those early downs at linebacker. I think they'll just sort of use Quay Walker in more creative ways as a rusher. Maybe on these early downs, he plays on the edge. He's another option for them to play on the edge with, kick Van Ness, Devontae Wyatt, and Kenny Clark as your 3 down linemen, and then you have Rashawn Gary and Quay Walker as the guys playing on the edge with Wilson and Devondre Campbell as your inside linebackers. I think that's a possibility as well, but as it stands as a pure stand-up linebacker, inside linebacker in this system, he's the worst against the run. So he's got a long way to come for that. And a lot of that has to do with football IQ. A lot of that has to do with, patience and maturity. I keep going back to maturity with Quay Walker. So it'll be interesting to see how they roll out these linebackers because they did invest a lot in Quay Walker. Now we're taking a look at their pass coverage, and you got Jair Alexander, who I think still has the ability to be one of the top corners in the NFL. Albeit, again, just the way that he's been used, it hasn't really had the opportunity to use his full potential out there. So it's hard to grade him It's hard to grade him up there with a guy like Sauce Gardner, who is used in a way that allows him to use his talents properly. I think Jair Alexander is one of the most underutilized great talents in the NFL. They got Eric Stokes, who's sort of up and down, Rasul Douglas as well out there. Rudy Ford had a really surprising year last year, I would say. Really has stepped up good, had some really good performances throughout the season. And then Savage is like the guy you drop into the slot. Maybe he's a little safety. I think he's had a really up and down career. He's had some really good moments and some really bad moments. You take a look at some of the depth and pass coverage. You got Shamar Jean-Charles, who's like the only real depth you have at corner. You got Keyshawn Nixon, who's technically a corner, but he's like that. He's your return guy, and then he plays on special teams, which he could be effective in the run game, but his overall talent level is just like, I don't know. It's like Devin Hester. Like Devin Hester was technically a corner for a while, and they moved him to receiver. Corey Ballantyne is just one of the worst players in the NFL. Tarvarius Moore and Dalen Levitt, I guess, are depth at the safety position. And Jonathan Owens is just not in the passing game at all. And then you take a look at the run support, and none of the guys that are starters are really anything against the run, which is where there's real issues. And it's brutal. Like Rasul Douglas and Jair Alexander are good cornerbacks, good defensive backs against the run. Keyshawn Nixon can play against the run because he's got all that special teams experience. I think the same thing is true with Tarvarius Moore. But for everybody else, there's not a whole lot in that secondary. A lot of what they're going to have to do is play really disciplined on the edges, which is why I think a guy like Lucas Van Ness might end up being a guy who's an outside linebacker on early downs. And that's really what his role will be, is because of his discipline in that sense and him being able to close that off and keep everything sort of within the tackles. I think that's really in the best interest of this defense. And then just be sure body tacklers, wrap them up at the linebacker position, which is why I think Eric Wilson will end up seeing the field a lot in those early downs as well. So you see the position summary, and again, kind of like the offense, there are bodies. You got the bodies, you got the talent. You just don't have the defensive creativity, and you're kind of lacking in a bunch of areas as well in terms of, like the back, like safety coverage is going to be a bit of a liability. The safeties against the run the run will be a liability. There's a lot of liabilities on the back end of this defense, and when you play such a simplistic, uncreative strategy on the defense side of the ball, it really does expose the lack of talent more often than not. So we do look at the defense, and again, almost middle of the pack pass defense, almost middle of the pack rush defense. Their combined scores make them the 14th defense in the NFL. But overall, between the 14th, I think the range created here, 14th to 18th, is about where this defense will finish. Just because, again, the talent is there, so the talent can overcome, I think, enough of the deficiencies of the defensive coaching staff to make them at least serviceable, and make them, have them be like a middle of the pack defense with a middle of the pack offense, and then just hope that things line up in terms of giving up big plays and producing big plays that you can win more games than you lose, which I think they'll be just short of. In reality, but I do think, again, a middle of the pack defense, I think is a fair assessment. So here we are taking a look at their schedule, and I'm gonna hold on to the fact that they still own Chicago. I'm gonna call it a curse of the franchises. They do play Vegas, which I think is gonna be, they can get a win there. The Rams, the Bucks, the Panthers. So there's winnable games on this schedule. I will say that. They play Atlanta at home in the Dome. That fast track with Bijan and those guys, I think, could turn into a bit of an issue. The games against Minnesota, I just don't think they match up well against Minnesota. The games against Detroit, I don't think they match up well against Detroit either. Definitely not against Kansas City or the Chargers. I think that against Pittsburgh, even though I think, Pittsburgh will be coming up in the next couple of videos. That's a team that, because I just don't trust them, I think there's a team that they can snag a win off of. But really everywhere else, they're kind of losing the games that I think everyone would expect them to at this point. Not really knowing the full story of Jordan Love, right? I think that's fair. So just going over a quick summary again, they're 7-10. They are last in the NFC North, 10th in the conference, 20th overall in the league, 23rd coaching staff, which is, I think, at the end of the day is what really drags them down, because they do have the 15th total offense and the 14th total defense, to me, right in the middle of the pack there. But the coaching staff and the lack of creativity and my lack of faith in them is what drags them down from being a middle of the pack team to being, a below, like a tier below the middle of the pack, we'll say. So, but hey, this coaching staff could surprise everyone and be maybe, a top 15 coaching staff. And then this team is a playoff team at that point, because they do have the talent in a lot of key positions. The question mark of the quarterbacks aside, there's something there. There's something here in Green Bay that, that you look at them and you go, oh, they're so close. They're so close. Just a couple things need to happen. There you have it, my number 20 team in my 2023 Deep Dive series, the Green Bay Packers. What do you guys think? Leave it in the comment section below. Like the video, even if you hate me. It helps out with the algorithms, helps this channel grow, and growth is a good thing. And subscribe, please. And thank you. If you don't want to, then, that makes me sad. You can watch the rest of the series here, the next video there. And I'll see you guys hopefully next time with the next video.